This month, I'm going to just show you how you can create rocks with a credit card. Now I'm just going to dive in. I'm painting here just very, very roughly in quite a thick paint, um, a rock shape. So I'm using a bit of burnt sienna and I've mixed up a very dark colour with ultramarine and burnt sienna. I'm doing it wet on dry. I'm not wetting the area first, but it is the consistency of single cream, and that's really quite important. So it's only really successful for rocks that are in the foreground. Delicate rocks in the background, it's not as easy to use this technique. So I'm just going to paint a little bit more, I think, at the bottom here, just to make it a slightly bigger area. Now the bit on the right, sorry, I've used Aquafix on here. Now if you've looked at my other videos on YouTube, you'll know that this is a permanent solution. You just mix it with your paint instead of water, and it dries like acrylic, so it's permanent and it won't move. Now the reason I'm doing this is that when you start using the credit card, you scrape some of the paint away and it scrapes back to the paper underneath. So the one on the left, fundamentally, probably, it should scrape back to white, so all the highlighted areas will be white. Now if you don't want your highlights to be white, then you might want to think about using some Aquafix. So if you wanted them to be like an orangey colour, the highlights, then might be a solution. We're just going to practice this because the paint underneath that's got the Aquafix in it will not move. And hopefully that'll make more sense at the end when I show you the results. So they're very wet. You can see how shiny they are. And it has to be sort of drying a little bit for it to work. But you could chop up a credit card, you can chop up to any size you want, and you need to use the flat of it. So you see I've just scraped away there. And that's not too bad because that was beginning to dry at the edge. Let's try over here. Now I can see here that that's still too wet at the bottom and it wants to flood back into the shape that you've just scraped. So I'm going to jump from one to the other, backwards and forwards. And the problem is, if your paper's not flat, it's really difficult to get that nice flat scraping away. Can you see I've made like a bit of a scratch mark there? And that's because my paper's not stretched and it's beginning to cockle. So if it's on stretch paper, it will be easier. I'm going to try a bit at the bottom here. It's still not dry enough. You can see how wet it is. Let's try again. Now it's dry. Now it's beginning to dry more and it's staying. So when you scrape away, it's not wanting to flood back into that shape. And that's what you want. So you just need to experiment with this. It doesn't look like much at the moment, but hopefully it will at the end. That's better. You need to go right from the top. You're better working from the top and working your way down, really. It's not always easy to do that, but that's ideal if you can. So I'm just thinking about what the rocks would look like. I'm taking paint off and I'm sort of putting it back on again, like in little, to sort of create cracks really. So can you see where it's scraping back? But it's scraping back not to white paper, but to orange paper. So that seems to have worked quite well. Whereas on the other one, it's scraping back more to white, which is quite effective as well, but it depends on what you want. Okay. It's a bit wet in the middle actually. Yeah, it's still a bit too wet there. I might have to wait a bit for that. Let's do a bit down here. Okay. When you've done that, you can then work back into it with a brush and put even more detail on. So I'm just going to put a few dark areas here, a few cracks and crevices, and then you can soften them with water. And you do as much or as little as you want. I sometimes get carried away because I do love painting rocks. Something very therapeutic about it. And it does make it easier because the shapes that you created have given you a starting point. And then you can just emphasize parts. Emphasize the gullies and the crevices. So I'll just speed this up a little bit. But you get the idea. So the credit card gives you a great starting point. It's a foundation. Because rocks are not easy to do just from scratch. I'll just do this little bit that was not quite dry. I think that's better now. Okay. So if we take a closer look at the one on the left, you can see the highlights of that are white because it's gone back to the white paper, so like the tops of the rocks. Whereas the one on the right, which had the Aquafix, which was like a glaze of orange, you can see the highlights have gone back to the orange, not the white. I hope that makes sense. So you could create any colour as the foundation colour for your highlights. Now this is just another little example of one I did on a tester sheet. And one here, and then I did one here in blue. So let's just have a look at those in action, this technique in action on some of my paintings. Now this was done on location in Solva in Pembrokeshire. This was pretty much solely done with credit card. This was done on location in Staithes on the east coast. And finally, this was just from my memory, really made up, but I like the idea of doing something that was monochrome, and I just used the credit card for those rocks at the bottom. So there you have it. I hope that's helped. Go and have a play, get your credit cards chopped up, and happy painting.